In World War II, one aircraft didn't just fight for survival, it defined victory. The F6F Hellcat was more than a machine. It was the US Navy's iron fist in the Pacific, built to outclimb, outfight, and outlast everything Japan could throw at it. From factory blueprints to fiery dogfights, this was the plane that turned underdogs into aces. And if that sounds impressive, wait until you see what it did next. Before the Pacific turned into a battlefield, Grumman engineers were already at work on a secret project that would change aviation history. The Navy's existing Wildcat was brave but broken, slow to climb, fragile to land, and outdated the moment Japan's Zero entered the skies. Pilots returning from early war games made their demands brutally clear: more power, wider gear, better visibility, and a cockpit that didn't feel like a coffin. At Grumman's Long Island Iron Works, those demands weren't ignored. They were engraved into blueprints. Co-founder Jake Swerble, chief engineer William Schwendler, and test pilot Bob Hall didn't want another fighter. They wanted the fighter. They built a machine around pilot survival. Heavy spars, thick armor, and a forgiving wing design meant that even mistakes wouldn't kill you. It wouldn't be pretty, it would be tough. Every inch of the new design spoke the same language: practicality over perfection. The Navy's message was simple: get us upstairs faster. That line reached President Roosevelt himself, who echoed it back to the Bureau of Aeronautics. The pressure was enormous. In 1942, with the Pacific collapsing, Grumman engineers raced against both the clock and the enemy. They succeeded. In barely 14 months, the F6F Hellcat went from drawing board to carrier deck, a feat almost unheard of in wartime aviation. The plane wasn't sleek or glamorous, but it was everything pilots had begged for: fast, strong, stable, and deadly. As one aviator said, "You don't fall in love with a Hellcat, you trust it." And soon, that trust would be tested in skies filled with fire. If you think its creation was extraordinary, wait until you see how one engine transformed it from a strong fighter into an unstoppable weapon. Subscribe to Heritage for more stories that built the legends of the sky. When the first Hellcat prototype took off in June 1942, it looked right, but felt wrong. Its Wright R2600 engine couldn't give it the muscle to climb or fight effectively. The plane needed something that could lift not just its weight, but the Navy's hopes. The answer came in the form of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, a powerhouse already roaring inside the Corsair and the P-47 Thunderbolt. The transformation was instant. The Double Wasp packed 2,000 horsepower, giving the Hellcat brute strength and the agility to match. Test pilot Bob Hall's July 30th flight proved it. The aircraft now climbed like a rocket and dove like a hammer. But that triumph came at a cost. On the next flight, the engine failed mid-air, forcing Hall into a violent crash landing. He survived, battered but alive, living proof of the Hellcat's toughness. With its new engine, the F6F wasn't just faster, it was fearless. The R2800's twin-stage supercharger let it breathe where Japan's Zeros gasped for air. Above 20,000 feet, the Hellcat ruled, turning every dive into a death sentence for its enemies. And because it was air-cooled, it could take gunfire, leak oil, and still fly home, a rare mercy in the Pacific's unforgiving skies. Pilots called the R2800 the sound of survival. Mechanics called it the engine that wouldn't quit. It wasn't just power, it was trust. And soon, that trust would be forged into something greater. An aircraft built not just to fight, but to endure the impossible. Because power alone wasn't what made the Hellcat legendary. It was what Grumman built around it next that made it unbreakable. If you had to survive one landing on a heaving carrier deck in 40-knot winds, the aircraft you wanted under you was the Hellcat. Grumman's engineers designed it like a tank that could fly. Every bolt, spar, and hydraulic system built with one rule: overbuild everything. The result wasn't elegance, it was indestructibility. The Hellcat's wings were constructed around heavy dual spars that could take twice the Navy's stress requirements. When a plane slammed into a carrier deck, tailhook biting steel, those wings flexed but never failed. Pilots trusted them with their lives. The fuselage was a fortress of aluminum ribs and armor. Around the cockpit sat 200 pounds of protection, with a bulletproof windshield and self-sealing fuel tanks that swelled shut when hit. It could come home riddled with holes and still taxi under its own power. Even the landing gear was a masterclass in practicality. The Wildcat's hand-cranked wheels were replaced by hydraulic retractors that folded smoothly into the wings, giving it a wide, stable stance on takeoff and landing. Every feature, manual backups, emergency air bottles, simple hydraulics, was there to keep pilots alive even when systems failed. This wasn't innovation for speed, it was engineering for forgiveness. The Hellcat could take damage, pilot error, or brute punishment and still keep flying. Crews called it the plane that could land itself. But ruggedness alone wasn't what made the Hellcat legendary. It was what happened when that toughness met combat, when it faced the Zero head-on and changed the balance of the Pacific forever. Subscribe to Heritage to keep exploring the machines that refuse to die. The Hellcat entered the war quietly, but it didn't stay quiet for long. Its first combat mission came on August 31st, 1943, during the Marcus Island raid. Within a day, it scored its first confirmed kill, a Japanese H-8K Emily flying boat torn apart by 650 caliber guns. It was the beginning of a new era in naval air warfare. From that moment, the Hellcat proved itself not as an experiment, but as a phenomenon. Over Rabaul, Tarawa, and the Marshall Islands, it dominated the skies. Pilots who had once fought desperate battles in outdated Wildcats now found themselves leading offensives with confidence. They could climb faster, dive harder, and return home even when their aircraft looked like Swiss cheese. The statistics were staggering. In its first 6 months, Hellcats accounted for hundreds of Japanese aircraft destroyed, while suffering only a fraction of that in losses. The Japanese Zero, once feared across the Pacific, suddenly found itself outmatched. The Hellcat's armor absorbed hits that would have incinerated lesser planes, and its heavy guns shredded through Japan's lightweight fighters before they even reached firing range. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about morale. For the first time, American pilots felt the tide turning. They trusted their machine and believed in their chances. Mechanics called it the Iron Cat. Pilots called it the Ace Maker. The nickname stuck because it earned it. 3 out of every 4 Navy aerial victories in the Pacific would eventually come from a Hellcat's guns. By late 1943, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The Hellcat wasn't just winning battles, it was rewriting air warfare itself. And yet, its defining moment was still ahead. A battle so one-sided, historians still speak of it in disbelief. What came next would seal the Hellcat's place in history forever. June 19th, 1944. The skies above the Philippine Sea erupted in chaos as Japan launched over 400 aircraft from its carriers in a desperate gamble to stop the advancing US fleet. But the Hellcats were waiting, hundreds of them, guided by radar, circling in tight formations like hawks ready to strike. When the first Japanese wave appeared on radar, Navy controllers calmly vectored squadrons toward them. What followed was the most lopsided air battle of the war. Hellcats dove from the sun, ripping through Zeros and Judy bombers in minutes, the air filled with smoke and falling wreckage. Pilots described it as a turkey shoot, a grim name that would stick for generations, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By the end of the day, more than 350 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed. 2 days later, that number neared 600. Japan's elite carrier air wings, its best-trained aviators, were gone. The nation's air power had been broken in a single engagement. In comparison, US losses were minimal. Hellcats returned home riddled with bullet holes, missing chunks of wing, and still managed to land safely. The battle didn't just prove superiority, it ended an era. The Zero, once the symbol of Japanese dominance, had met the weapon built to destroy it. From that day forward, Japan would never again contest the Pacific skies on equal footing. The Hellcat had become more than a fighter. It was the steel wall that shielded the fleet, the reason Japan's carriers would never again threaten American dominance. But even with victory in sight, a darker challenge was approaching, one that no amount of armor or skill could fully prepare pilots for. The era of kamikazes was about to begin. By the war's end, the F6F Hellcat had done what no other fighter could. It achieved a kill ratio of 19-1, destroying over 5,000 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in air-to-air combat. In the brutal arithmetic of war, that ratio defined it as the most successful naval fighter ever built. It wasn't built for glamour, but for reliability. Pilots called it the plane that forgave mistakes. It turned nervous rookies into confident aces. More than 300 US Navy pilots became aces in Hellcats, each with 5 or more confirmed kills. Commander David McCampbell led them all, 34 victories, 9 in one mission, a record that still stands. The Hellcat fought everywhere, from the Gilberts to Okinawa, escorting bombers, intercepting raids, and striking ships. Its versatility made it indispensable. It could carry rockets, bombs, and even experimental radar, evolving into night fighters that hunted enemies in total darkness. And when the war ended, it wasn't retired in disgrace. It was celebrated as the aircraft that won the Pacific. Its legacy didn't end there. The lessons learned in its design, strength, survivability, simplicity, shaped every US Navy fighter that followed. The F8F Bearcat, the F9F Panther, and even the iconic F14 Tomcat carried its DNA. For decades, pilots still spoke of the Hellcat with reverence. It wasn't the prettiest bird, but it was the one that always came home. The Hellcat's roar faded from the skies, but its story never did. It stands today as a reminder of what happens when engineering meets necessity and courage meets steel. Because in the end, wars aren't won by perfect machines. They're won by the ones that don't break, the ones that endure. And in the Pacific, no aircraft endured like the Hellcat. The F6F Hellcat wasn't built to impress. It was built to survive, to fight, and to win. From its rugged frame to its roaring engine, it carried the Navy through the toughest battles of the Pacific and never lost its spirit. Its story is one of grit, innovation, and victory against the odds. Keep watching Vintage Planes for more untold stories that shape the machines and heroes of history.